In considering the idea of the principle of taking generalized principles and applying them to the home front, I saw that it was not a matter of social scientists have often thought of trying to find social behaviors, not a political reform whatsoever, but a matter of the fact that the universe is ever and forever continually intertransforming and following a number of rules and a number of alternate ways in which it can transform. So I said, I must understand how to produce artifacts out of the intertransformings of nature's energy, and these artifacts then will bring about environmental differences that completely alter the circumstances of humanity.
Inventor, architect, sailor, poet, physicist, mathematician, author, and natural philosopher. R. Buckminster Fuller, known as Bucky the world over, has dedicated his life's work to the understanding of universal principles in natural forces and the application of those principles in designing inventions that he calls artifacts. A distortionless map projection, his world-renowned geodesic domes, a lightweight living facility, a gas-efficient transport vehicle. Throughout all his work, these artifacts serve as examples of the same basic principles. Fuller is the author of innumerable research documents, as well as 12 books, culminating in his Synergetics, Exploration in the Geometry of Thinking, of which historian Samuel Eliot Morison has said, it will rank in the annals of science with Darwin's Origin of the Species.
I remember the first time ever looking back in the wake of my ship and seeing all those, the whiteness and the foam, and I said, that's white because it all consists of bubbles. I said, how many bubbles am I looking at? And I find I'm looking at fantastic numbers of bubbles. Here comes in this way. Look at all this whiteness, all those bubbles. Beautiful, beautiful bubbles, every one of them. I said, now, I've been taught in school, in order to be able to design, because a bubble is a sphere, you have to use pi. And the number pi, 3, 1, 4, 1, 6, on and on goes the number. We find that it cannot be resolved, called transcendental irrational. So I said, every time nature's making one of those bubbles, how many places she carry out pi before she discovers you can't resolve it? And at what point does nature decide to make a fake bubble? I said, I don't think nature's turning out any fake bubbles. I think that nature's not using pi. So this made me start looking for ways in which nature did contrive all of her menstruation, her spontaneous associations without using such numbers. And I'm quite confident I really have found her coordinate system where she doesn't have any irrationals whatsoever. Because in the chemistry you find her associating H2O, not H pi O. Always whole rational low order numbers, all of associating. Because society, 99% don't understand this. They don't understand that all that science and technology has ever found out is that the universe is most incredible technology, operating so beautifully. This, for instance, just something like a human being. I'm 81 years of age, and it's still working and still self-rebuilding, repairing on the downtime as we go up. I'm making sounds and it's working people's brains and understanding each other. Incredible technology. Because then 99% don't understand that science is trying to universe is technology, they're assuming that technology is something new and threatening. They identify it only with weapons and machinery of exploitation. Therefore, we have a very large number of humanity today thinking about giving up technology, which means giving up universe. In other words, the blockage now is then because humanity doesn't understand. The little child is a beautiful scientist. No scientist greater than that, because child was trying experimental evidence. Wanted to smell it, to touch it, taste it, continue doing this thing. I have a little child, he has his mother's necklace. He found this lovely necklace, it bends like that, and I said, how and why can it bend? Well, this thing is not bending, and this is not changing its length. This is what's doing it here. So I'm going to get rid of these things that don't do it, and so I take one of those out and put this together again. I still it's a necklace, put my head through it, bends all over the place, and try and take another one out. Kind of keep, because the child tries to get nature down into a corner. They finally get down to, yes, sure, bends all like that, put their head through it. This happened to be what they gave you in school called a square. And when the teacher said this way, start geometry is a square, and she said, this is the unit of measure. The only reason they held it shape is because the blackboard was holding it shape. It had no integrity whatsoever. So the little child doesn't like that at all. So he said, I'm going to take one more out. And so now, put my hand, got a hole in it. It won't change its shape. Boy, this holds its shape. If I take one more out, it doesn't have any hole in it. This is the last case. And this is the last case, and it holds its shape. I want to know how it holds its shape. I want to know what thing makes shape. I've got it. These things won't hold their shape. So, then this little child, and this is what we really call you and I call the triangle, and it consists of 6 completely independent parts. 3 of these flexible things and 3 of these push-pull compressions. So we find what we call a structure is a complex of events interacting to produce a stable pattern. And everything you and I use the word recognize, it must go back to a triangle. All right. So triangle is structure is triangle. Now the next thing the child wants to know, came out of the womb and wants to know, what can you get inside of, what can you get outside of? You want to have inside and out. Anything this child can point to is substantial, have inside and outside. So we find that the minimum number, we have 2 points have between this, 3 points have between this, we don't have inside and out. Not like 4 points, we have inside and outside. I got the outside and inside of it, and this is great. This is what we call the tetrahedron. And this is what we call the minimum, because they're all triangles, therefore it's a minimum structural system in the universe. It divides all the universe outside the system, all the universe inside the system, the very essence of anything of our thinking. And we say, I want to understand things. I want, what are the connections of the system? Well, we can get 3 triangles around each corner of the tetrahedron, and it's a structural system, divides the universe inside and outside. I can get 4 triangles around each corner, which call it the octahedron, divides the universe inside and outside, all triangulated. So it's a structural system. I can get 5 triangles around each corner, and it divides the universe inside and outside, all triangulated, and it's also a structural system called icosahedron. So I get 4 for 1 here. Here I get 2 for 1. Here I get only 1 for 1 because I get the most structure with the least structural investment, most volume in the icosahedron. That's why I use it as the base of all the geodesic structures.
Tetrahedron, octahedron, icosahedron. Newton's physics and Einstein's mathematics taught Fuller that all is energy pattern, even what we call matter, and revealed to his search the structural mathematics based on nature's most economic pattern, the crystal-shaped tetrahedron. Finally, conception becomes reality. In his dome for the Ford Rotunda at Detroit, Michigan, the basic unit is an aircraft aluminum alloy strut, only 1 meter long and less than 1 millimeter thick. 19,680 of them make up the 30-meter clear-span dome. The connection between the tetrahedron and the evolving sphere work in a union of opposites, the push and pull of tension and compression. As the size of the dome increases, it actually grows stronger. These lightweight structures are easily portable. The International Trade Fair Dome in Tokyo is packed into 1 medium-sized airplane and set up by unskilled labor within only 48 hours of delivery. The aluminum grid frame is dressed in white sailcloth. It has done service in Poznan, Kabul, Rangoon, and Osaka, Milan, Bangkok, Damascus, Lima, and Casablanca. With the Kaiser Dome, skin and bones are blended as the geometry is impressed into aluminum pans. Manufactured in Oakland, California, the 44-meter Kaiser Dome was erected in Honolulu in 22 hours. Time-lapse photography graphically depicts the whirlwind speed of its construction. By the 22nd hour, an audience of 1,500 people were seated and listening to a concert. Materials are interchangeable. A polyester fiberglass pan is used for the radar domes of the distant early warning system along the Arctic perimeter. And when weight is not critical, even steel is used, as in the Union Tank Car Roundhouse at Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the world's largest clear-span structure. In Ohio, the American Society of Metals Dome is all framework. A web of light carries the magnificence of Fuller's ideal to its most ethereal form, a roof of sky. Fuller's structures dot the earth, any material, any size, anywhere.
We've gone from the time of my father of 40,000 miles in a lifetime to 4 million. That's 100 times. So the people range very differently from when they're before. In all the cities we now know cities, when people went only 40,000 in a lifetime, not 4 million. So that what's going on in humanity is coming together to meet and they're pulsing. All the cities were built because they were a confluence of a great overhead land trail or a river or something. They were for trading and production. They're not used to that anymore. When I was young, 90% of humanity were on the farms, now only 7.5%. So people have come from those farms into cities and now obsolete in the old way. So those cities are not going to carry on. But what we will, the minute that we come into disarmament, then the great production capability of airspace are going to come to bear on our structures.
Fuller envisions whole cities coming in like a fleet of ships in a harbor, and, if desired, removed in a day. So humanity will be converging for meeting and talking, for culture and commerce.
Unquestionably, the development of dwellings for human beings where we deploy, and you want a single family, we're going to be developing great many geodesic domes out of bamboo, which rots fairly soon, but we'll use that as a trellis for vines. And the vines will get very, very powerful, so by the time the bamboos become weak and old, the vines are taking on the geodesic dome shape itself. So people will be growing their own domes. We'll be growing youth hostels. We'll have 2 geodesic domes, one inside the other, maybe about 6 feet apart, all covered with vines. And between the two, we'll have some vinyl covering so that rain can't come through, but you'll seem to be just living in the bower of nature. I've been asked also to put over domes over in the oldest diggings in the world we now know about in Ban Chang in northeast Thailand, finding the earliest beginning of the Bronze Age there. And asked various places to put domes in place. What I think we're going to be seeing happening in that time when human beings could only cover a little distance, and now they make great. We took the great antiquities apart and took them to great museums around the world. What we're now going to do is to rebuild the Babylons and take all of these antiquities and bring them back where they should be. So that humanity will go to them, and probably archaeologists and anthropologists have been living in various kind of ways, really reconstructing the life of yesterday. We're going to not be able to travel geographically alone, but actually in time.
In California recently, with his wife of more than 50 years, Anne Hewlett, Fuller reflected on the sources of his life work. His early near blindness, the childhood sensory experiences and empirical observations which led to his inventive way of considering the world.
Put the new tube back in.
Yeah. Oh, the newspaper and everything.
I think that's enough for you.
There.
Well, reflectively, I have to say one word that describes the phenomena of life, experience life, it'd be the word awareness. So awareness is where it begins. And there's no otherness, there's no awareness. So it was the otherness that I was so aware of. And that the otherness was the motherness and the people, hands on you, doing kindly things, and the food coming in. My eyes are very misshapen, so they're very, what they call very far-sighted. I have correcting lens. I had various things that I didn't know anything wrong with me, because this is what I could see, and that's what I assumed everybody else could see. I couldn't see any details, so I just saw colors, and I loved the colors. I'm very excited by the colors. And my mother couldn't quite understand why I would be continually falling in with love with different kind of a green or a purple. In the early childhood, I think that one of the most important things about it was the importance of smell to me, because I couldn't see details. And I couldn't see people's eyes. I really couldn't tell about personalities through eyes. And I really began to know people by the way they smelled.
Fuller's mother, Caroline Andrews Fuller, near their home in Milton, Massachusetts.
Home smelled good, but by and large, buildings smelled wrong. All the public buildings smelled absolutely wrong to me. School buildings smelled terrible. I was at kindergarten for about half a year before I got my glasses. And one of the first days of that kindergarten, the teacher brought some semi-dried peas and toothpicks. And she told us all to make structures. And the other children who had good eyes had seen all the houses on the way to school and so forth. They were familiar with houses and structures. With my bad sight, I just sort of bulks. I had no feeling at all about seeing any structural lines. And because I couldn't, I naturally was having recourse to my other senses, so my fingers and my feelings were very, very delicate. And my smelling was so, and my hearing was. Anyway, when she told me to make structures, I tried to make something that would work, and I found the triangle held its shape and nothing else held its shape, so I must make something out of what's holding its shape. And she said, make a structure. And I was asking a little question about it, and she said, yes, something has a shape, it holds a shape there. So because the dried peas held the toothpicks in place for a square, the kids could make a rectilinear, and it seemed to stand up because the pea held its shape. But if it had been actually a flexible cone, it wouldn't. But my feeling was I was pushing and pulling, and that triangle felt nice and steady, so I made a tetrahedron and an octahedron, tetrahedron truss, which today would be, what in physics would be isotropic vector matrix, or the uniform interpositioning equal diameter spheres in closest packing. And I had this structure all triangulated, and I remember the teacher calling all the other teachers. There was a little primary school as well as the kindergarten, and they all looked at this thing, and I was surprised that they were surprised, because I just felt I'd done something just logical to do. So at 4 1/2, they took me to an eye doctor, and he found that my lenses were misshapen, and they gave me correction. So that one of the most interesting things in my life is that while they've given me increased magnification as I get older, I still have exactly the same correction. So all I have to do is to take off my glasses today and see what I saw before I was 4 1/2 years of age. So when I take them off, I found that I can't see any human eyes. I see shadowy areas on the face. I get the color of the face, and I get the color of the hair, but no really sharp line. I don't see any single hairs. And I can see the pinkness of the mouth. I see sort of bright highlight on the side of the nose and things like that. So imagine my surprise when I got my glasses for the first time. Suddenly saw human eyes, and then eyes of the cats, and eyes of little snakes, and all these creatures had eyes. And everybody seemed to be communicating through those eyes. I haven't had that kind of communication before. And the feeling of love and warmth around me.
Bear Island, the Fuller family-owned vacation place in Penobscot Bay, Maine. An island that provided a practical boyhood lesson in working on the land and at sea.
Out at Bear Island, we were out there. The community is one of possibly one or two families on this island. Many hours, no families at all. And I got to know going around my own little boat to know all those fishermen, farmers. They did both. And they had to do everything. They were tremendously ingenious at making the tools and making the boats, and they combined the arts of the sea and the land. Well, I then grew up the idea of cutting your own trees and making your own planks and making your own boats. It was a very exciting thing for my life.
Fuller's father, Richard Buckminster Fuller, Sr.
My father died when I was very young. My father was an incredibly loving man, and I didn't really miss the warmth of that father. And a very sad thing really happened. My father had a stroke 3 years before he died, and very, very series of strokes, and really quite quickly he became, actually, he could not do anything of his own. And here's this father that I worshiping and loving, I was leading him around by his hand, and this was a very strange kind of experience for a kid, too. So here is my mother really appreciative of my being the oldest boy, and I had to do all kinds of things in the house.
The Fuller family consisted of a long line of Unitarian ministers, lawyers, and writers. His great-aunt, Margaret Fuller, was a writer and feminist who was instrumental in publishing the writings of Thoreau and Emerson.
Margaret then was just somebody in the family to me. I had no idea of a connection with Emerson, and Emerson was very much accepted and celebrated as a poet in my school days in English literature, American literature, and so forth. And so I didn't know about him well, and I did not know the extraordinary influence that my own Aunt Margaret had on him, possibly by far the strongest influence on it, as she having then really persuaded him that he ought to be really published, and together they founded the Dial magazine, which became the official magazine of the book farm of the Transcendentalist movement. And she then was the first to discover and publish Thoreau. So she was responsible for those men really coming out of the literary world, and yet in her time, a century earlier, it was so unprecedented and so unacceptable for a woman to be out in public life, particularly in an intellectual life, and particularly in intellectual life at Harvard, really being not only a companion, but many times the master of the male intellectual. But it was not an acceptable idea at all to New England.
Books were a very important part of a New England heritage. Fuller was educated in a traditional way at Milton Academy and Harvard University. An athlete and honor student until he decided not to take his mid-year exams. He was dropped from Harvard before graduation.
I had dreamed of Harvard as being the most extraordinary place, because there my father's den and so forth, all kinds of certificates for his clubs and this and that, and there are all kinds of records of not only my father, but my uncles had all gone. So there was a continual Harvard to-do going on. My class of 1970 at Harvard, 700, only 45 were there for graduation. Everybody went off into World War I. And so I too went off to World War I.
After joining the Navy and attending the Naval Academy, two special qualities became apparent in Fuller: pragmatism and leadership. The Navy represented a total conceptual approach to logistical problems of transportation around the oceans of the world, a world smaller than ever before. This concept of global planning is key to Fuller's design science.
And I got in the great transport operation, moving a million people across the ocean. This got me thinking really very, very big, because Navy is dealing with the three-quarters of Earth covered with water, and Navy is concerned with that, the total water and the total line of supply. I found the Navy thinking in terms of total world. That was a very extraordinary experience for me. the Navy meant not only getting into the airplanes and submarines, but also the radio. And the radio was just really developing. And fortunately, I had really several very exciting assignments. One of the boats I was in command of was assigned to not to lead the to make his first experiments of talking by voice, by radio, from an airplane to a boat on the sea, and we accomplished it there. This gave me really a lot of excitement of being in a new kind of a world. Then I became aide for secret information to the admirals in command of the 130 transports and cruisers of moving the million people across the ocean and back. And I had to keep track of all the movements of all the ships, but particularly I was very deeply involved in communications. And this gave me enormous insight. During the end of my tour at the time of the war, and came to the armistice, and President Wilson had then to go to Paris for the peace conference. The first president in history who had the radio, and they had the communications with something absolutely new for a president, but we had to then arrange for him to have communications all the way across the Atlantic. So I had those kind of experience. This began to tell me what was going on in technology. This breaking down of great distances and being able to go into the water and into the sky was something so foreign to anything my father and all my grandfather and great-grandfather. I'm lucky to have those diaries and expense accounts of my forebears, and I was realized an absolutely new kind of world was coming in. When I came out of the Navy, I went back in the armament company's great packing house, and they made me assistant export manager. I began to think about the total foods of humanity around the world. You can see then this comprehensive anticipatory way of looking at things and thinking about the total needs of total man. You understand how I came a few years later to invent the word spaceship Earth, because I began to think about our total planet as beautifully designed and beautifully equipped as a ship. and how do you run it in such a way as to take care of everybody? And I felt this is exactly what great nations are not able to do. They have geographical limits, and great corporations, nobody's thinking about those terms. I said, we should be doing that.
In 1917, he married Anne Hewlett. Her father, James Monroe Hewlett, was a prominent architect and founding director of the American Academy in Rome. Hewlett introduced him to the world of architecture, and for the first time, Fuller met builders on the land.
No beautiful father-in-law, Monroe Hewlett, but suddenly was a father there, and he was the first man who ever said to me, don't pay attention when people say, no, never mind what you think. He said, what you think is absolutely the most important thing possible. Pay attention to your own thought. What really hit me very hard was that building industry itself was quite clearly thousands of years behind the arts of designing ships for the sea and the sky. And even more important about my particular life was the fact that whereas in the Navy I had my ship and I was commanding my ship, and everything went great, because I didn't have to make any money with my ship. All I had to do was run a good ship and keep it on top of the water and get things done, tasks done. But suddenly when I got in the building world, I had to make money. And I found that I really had to come to a decision after decision. I'm going to do a good building and make money, because I found they seemed to be mutually exclusive, and I became really a complete failure at business. And I said, I'm going to really do my own thinking. I want to think about discovering, using the principles which have only been going in the weaponry of doing more with less, most highly advanced, generalized principles of nature, but it goes into theory of ballistics and how do you control the trajectory of explosive hurled missile, how do you build a ship, how do you develop the blast furnaces to make the steel for the ships, all those things had to be done. I said, I'd like to apply this same kind of competence and applying those principles at a high leverage to the home front. And I had a word for it because we had the word weaponry, so I invented a word called livingry. So this then brought me into really not trying to invent principles or discover principles, but really I already was aware of principles in physics, and I said, how do I employ these extraordinary principles to do more with less?
Realizing that there were certain generalized principles operative in the universe, Fuller made it his task to account for all of them at once. Drawing his inspiration from natural observation, he sought out and realized all the generalized principles which satisfy two tests. They are true without exception, and they are never in opposition to each other. The consequence of this personal discovery was that randomness could be replaced by a designed awareness. And the human mind had the unique capability to be admitted to some of the great design of the universe itself.
Look at the weight of these two bricks, just compression, heavy. Here's this lovely airplane piece. Pick it up with me. Just toss it. And it figures, light, nothing, no. Think of the plane flying now 300 miles an hour and be able to do this and not tear apart. This kind of brick building at 150 miles an hour, the whole brick building come apart. This is incredible, all this delicate stuff. But now it is obsolete in design. You can melt the whole thing up, make another airplane fly a little faster next time because you have more know-how of the same material. All the heavy ways of building around us, really the awkwardness of lines above ground, a great deal of mess out there that can be so greatly improved by competent design of doing more with less. Human beings are building all their buildings what they call continuous compression. They come out of Stone Age. It involves stone on stone. And all the engineering is calculated entirely on compressional continuities. So I said it's impossible for man to develop and employ the tension continuity, tensional integrity I called it, and then cut it down to tensegrity. And I found, yes, he had done it in the wire wheel. Could I then extend that further into the building in general? So I began trying, sure enough, I found I could.
His single family dwelling unit of 1929, called Dymaxion, a fusion of dynamic, maximum, and ions. Turning the wire wheel over on its side, the hub became a mast. Containing excellent space for a family of 5, this entire structure weighed only 2.7 metric tons, as against the conventional 137 metric tons. In 1947, Fuller developed the first actual Dymaxion house in Wichita, Kansas. Built with the aircraft industry's extraordinary structural capabilities, it was fabricated from aircraft aluminum. The mast itself was stainless steel, containing all the required service and power elements. On top was a great ventilator, 5.5 meters in diameter, which rotated as does a wind T at an airport. A low-pressure area occurred at the point where the ventilator tail was open. Air was then pulled through the house, making it completely air-conditioned. All facilities used the most up-to-date technology. And the house was completely portable, so that, in the manner of a dwelling machine, it might be set down in any desired location. In 1938, a Dymaxion bathroom, in a single unit, an entire bathroom containing all facilities and air conditioning. Weight, only 204 kilograms. In 1933, he developed the Dymaxion car, what he called an omni-medium transport. The vehicle was extraordinarily stable, with an extremely low center of gravity, the first vehicle that had its center of gravity forward of the mid-portion of the wheelbase. It had a very high efficiency as well. With 11 passengers, it averaged some 8 kilometers per liter. Also, it had a very small turning radius, whereas a conventional car with kingpins could only steer up to a 34-degree angle. The Dymaxion car's rear rudder post allowed a 90-degree turn if desired. This meant that a driver wanting to park could drive into a space just 21 centimeters longer than the car itself.
Supposing this is a galaxy moving around like this, we've learned already that if I were to pull on this, it'll force it to contract. I must remember that when I was lowering this top triangle, I want you to look what I'm doing. This triangle points towards you, the one on the table points towards me. I must lower this top triangle without ever rotating it at all. I'm lowering it, the point stays towards you, never twisting. So I'm not twisting this axis at all, only the equator's motion. This is what you call four-dimensional motion. For the first time in your life, you're seeing four-dimensional motion. Axis is not rotating, but the equator is rotating. So I want to understand now, if I pull on this, then it'll make it contract. Let's suppose this is a galaxy. There's another galaxy, mass attraction here, pulls on this. So pulling it like this, it throws torque in the, and makes it plug through this way and becomes then the tetrahedron. One thing the tetrahedron can do, nothing else can do, it can turn itself inside out. And so we have then, this is your positive and your negative universe. So we have then, it even comes back into the basics of the 8 triangles themselves. So we get, here's all the basic structural integrity of the universe, the 8 foldedness of our gravity.
His vector equilibrium, the quintessence of his energetic, synergetic geometry. Universe, Fuller reminds us, is not a static thing, but a closed whole system of constantly transforming energy events, and similar in structure from its largest to its smallest parts, from macrocosm to microcosm, with man himself in between. Fuller's transcendental view is that man should function in harmony with the universe, using more mind and less matter, so that all may share in the world's resources. He says, I am not imitating nature, I'm trying to understand the principles she's using.
Environment, I think people tend to think statically about, and they think of some hard walls, and that's environment. I wrote a little jingle. Environment to each must be all that isn't me. Universe in turn must be all that isn't me and me. The only difference between environment and universe is me, the observer. Now, environment is not things. We are in a universe that's all energy and all energy events. And these events, the larger ones are least frequent, the smallest more frequent.
Fuller is devoted to a young world unprejudiced by conditioned modes of thought, and thus able to affect his design science for the future. At the Southern California Institute of Architecture in Santa Monica, he talked to a seminar of young architects about his global concepts and design for efficient energy use.
Through the food thing. Nature then you and I can teach and talk to each other whether there's enough tolerance. Something you absolutely have to have, but there's enough tolerance so you don't die. She found man could not learn it. The oxygen was so important. She took no chance. You get all the air. The air's been socialized always. In order to be able to play the world game and design science competently, I found that, number one, I want to be able to see my Earth. I want to see my Earth in an informed manner. And then if you, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Mercator map, that's what you're given in school, the east-west stretch out, where you'll find Greenland, for instance, is 3 times the size of Australia on the map, which is exactly opposite of the fact. And there's no Antarctic on it at all. So that I needed something, I wanted a background. I'd like to, when you look at the globe itself, you may think, why not just use a globe? But you find if you try, make action tests, how much you can read around the tangent side, you can only read a quarter of the surface at any one time. And I wanted to be able to see all of it at once. So I then brought me a mathematical challenge, and I did develop this method of a projection of the Earth's surface where there's no visible distortion of the relative shape or the relative size of any of the parts, and there's no break in any of the continental contours. So I have one world island and one world ocean. This one triangle right here is 54% of humanity, this one triangle. When we want to think about where did humanity come from, and I began to get the relative numbers, percentage of humanity on, for instance, here we have 4% of humanity and 7% and so forth. Then 29% over here. Quite clearly, here's 54%. This is where it's coming from. It's starting here in the somehow rather right now. We're quite sure we're coming out of the ocean up onto the land in here, and then coming around this way, and we get to really. This is a very remote place of the Americas. They had to come by. They could come by land up this way and get over here. This is a very remote spot where we are, in the terms of the natural motion of human beings on the planet. In playing the world game and using the map as a background with no distortion to be able to list resources, what I developed to start a comprehensive what I call inventory of world resources, human trends and needs. The enormous storage of information which I've been carrying forward for the last 50 years. So I then must play the world game by what I call comprehensive anticipatory design science. And comprehensive anticipatory design science must always be synergetic, must be realized if you make this move, what does that do to other things over there? You must then have your critical path, first things first, and see how those overlap in the most logical manner. I'm going to take all the resources and look in terms of all the gained know-how to date and see if there's any way we might be able to do so much with so little. We might be able to take care of everybody, which would make all the political systems, which is assuming there's nowhere nearly enough to go around, would make that concept obsolete. And then the war would become obsolete. So that became the grand strategy, and I called it world gaming. And the world gaming is played not as checkers, it's obviously against an enemy at all. It's played really against ignorance. It's played against inertia and fear. It's played then, how do I use those resources in the most effective way? What are the first tasks to be done?
At a recent World Game session in Carbondale, Illinois, Fuller and students prepare his Dymaxion map for the plotting of world resources data. Every year, students from the world over meet with him to play the world game. Global planning and problem solving. The intelligent allocation of world resources.
At the world game of 3 years ago in Pennsylvania, they did a complete, a tight study of the energy of our Earth, all the different types of resources and so forth, and they were able to publish a book. This book is done exactly the way they did the Apollo project. What are all the things that have to be done to get human beings to the moon and back safely? It turned out to be actually 2 million things, and one of the first things first, a critical path. So there's a book now published, written by Medard Gable, who led the project. I wrote an introduction, and Stuart Brandt wrote an epilogue for it. It's called Energy, Earth, and Everybody. And this book reveals everything you want to know about energy. It's all there. I became fascinated thinking about then our human beings on board of our planet, the spaceship Earth idea, and playing the world game, and how do we then get energy from here to there to help one another. There's no way you can get energy from here to there at the present time in such large amounts as by wire, like electrical conductivity. But this means you want to go further and further, you have to get higher and higher voltage to deliver. And to get higher and higher voltage, you get to more and more insulating kind of problems and so forth. We only really get into that large energy electrical distribution at the time of World War I. It's called World War. And we we found that an enormous amount of manufacturing be done. How much of the metals could really go into the eye lines and still leave enough metals over there to produce all the other goods we needed? So it came to then, this is where we found the 350 miles are about the limit of deliverability on an economic basis. And that has persisted since World War I until 15 years ago, when with the space program we began to learn so much more about, in re-entry, enormous heats and structural stresses. We got into discovering much better insulating devices and so forth. We got into cryogenetics, got into the really no energy losses at all at the near absolute zero phase and so forth. So we got into 15 years ago what's called ultra-high voltage, where it became practical now to consider delivering 1,500 miles instead of 350. This fascinated me very much because I could see, when I look at my world map, if you look at Mercator, you wouldn't think of it. If you look at my world map, you can see not only could I then cross the time zones here, but I could reach Alaska. And there's an enormous amount of water power to be realized in Alaska. We haven't done so far. Then I saw that the Russians were putting dams, hydroelectric dams, in all the northerly flowing rivers, all the way over here. I suddenly found I could reach the Russian network, 1,500 miles. Boy, this would mean something, because with all that standby power you have to have for the peak load times, is that most of the time, 50% of the generating capacity is not being used. I found then that by integrating this network here, we'd integrate night and day, and it would mean that you double the generating capacity and operative around the world right away. It's now demonstrably, as physically evidenceable, and to the satisfaction of any engineers and intelligent person looking at the data, that is now, with the resources we already have mined and recirculating, with the knowledge we already have, with the technology and the rate we know how we can produce that technology, is now demonstrable that we can, within 10 years of starting to do so, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known or dreamt of, and be doing so while phasing out all, during that 10 years, phasing out altogether all use of all fossil fuels and all atomic energy, that we can live on our energy income. So now that I really know that, I know that we can really be looking out for the generations to come, and I also know that every country as it industrializes, the kilowatt hours of energy consumed per capita goes up, down goes the birth rate exactly corresponding, so that as we begin to get that success, I dare to predict we'll never have more than 6 billion human beings on our planet. And so we're not in that kind of a nonsense population explosion of which is so often heard. And also could say that we'd have no energy crisis, because we could really live on our energy incomes. That's the kind of thing that, for instance, the school we're sitting at here is really concerned with. How do you harvest the income energy, not burning up the savings account of nature, which is the fossil fuels? And we find that money and the business of making political hay and then making money for great corporations is so short-sighted. It only is interested where you can put a meter in between the human beings and the wind, and they won't do all those things that really need to be done. So if it's going to be done, it's going to be done really by the initiative of a young world such as we have at this school. Nice idea. Beautiful.
The practical effect of Fuller's teaching, a look at natural principles and human needs, is to enable intelligent decisions to be made about everyday design problems.
Like this in the University of Bristol in England in the 1950s.
Most importantly, Fuller believes architecture students should be aware that the aesthetic beauty of design lies in solving functional problems efficiently.
There's something you have to remember when, which they learned with big pneumatic domes, that when you have wind, the air is compressible, so the drag will pull it down like a flame, candle flame. It can be beautiful in compression, but in drag it's flat down on you.
You got to stay in it.
Yeah. This is the new world that's coming in. There's an invisible world. We're doing more with less. We're going very soon to be having beam power, and not having to have those wires at all. Really quite exciting. And then when you begin to have the autonomous dwelling itself, stop having fixed buildings and paying enormous amounts of power to it, you generate your power locally, as you do on the airport. For instance, an great airplane comes in as a small city. And what you do is, up comes a great truck with electric generators and turns the whole thing on. Up comes another truck with the air conditioners. We don't need to build wires and pipes in the concrete buildings. We just move the power around when it goes. There's a really enormous difference between the scrap up here on the roof of the aircraft industry and the scrap down below behind me of the old building industry and the oil pipelines and so like that. This is very good for a school. This is a school. And this building has been built almost entirely out of scrap from the aircraft plants. It's very important for the school to be able to feel these things, even though they can be melted up. But before they get melted up, really, be sure you really learn a lesson from it. And then down below here we have then enormous amount of the heavier type of scrap of steel, there's enough metal there to turn out over 20 of the new geodesic fly's-eye domes, for instance. That's, I can give you 20 homes out of what you see down lying there, and that scrap heap. And that's what I'm hoping the students, by having this familiarity with the aircraft type of design engineering, will realize that they really can do. "50 years ago, when I undertook the experiment to see what the little human being could do effectively on behalf of all humanity, I saw that one of the things to do would be to go so far ahead in time that nobody who had any ownership of any kind would feel threatened. And therefore I would be really left alone. And it has really been quite exciting. That is so. I was able to get enormous momentum. And now I find that, for instance, ownership is becoming onerous. All the things I would like to effect by developing a mobile, high air deliverable dwelling facilities and things like that, now they're all coming in. And now this is my last 50 years program, and I find things are really coming in right on schedule. From now on, it's going to be quite clear when there's enough to go around, nobody's going to be trying to have to earn the living. You already earn it by just being born. And so nobody will be doing things because it's a way to earn a living to the satisfaction of somebody else. You're going to be saying, what does my experience teach me needs to be done? And everybody's being born in the presence of less misinformation, enormous amount more reliable information. So there's enormous stimulation for all humanity to see things that need to be done and to say, what more do I need to know in order to do something about it effectively? To begin to study together and to be absolutely spontaneous cooperation. I use the analogy of the sailing ship, where on board of a sailing ship, a sailor, everybody knows not only every rope, but every little screwdriver knows, and when they do everything cooperate spontaneously, because they all know what it's about. So I see all of humanity operating that kind of a way. It'll be nothing at all to do anymore than with little me surviving. It's going to be everybody or nobody, and we'll be realizing that we are here for a very much more important kind of task, very serious task in relation to the local universe, the eternal regeneration of the universe. So we'll be looking for entirely new kind of responsibilities, and they will be accepting them very powerfully. I say all of humanity, having always been born naked, helpless, ignorant, we've come out of a group womb of permitted ignorance within which we had an enormous amount of resources, which by trial and error to make enormous number of mistakes, to get to the point where we discover our muscle is nothing and our mind is everything. But muscle is still in control of human affairs. So we're coming into a final examination where we're going to, if we come about 10 years, we're going to come into either utopia or oblivion. And if we come out with muscle in control, it's oblivion. If we come out with mind in control, it's going to be utopia and eternity.
transmission.